Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos de Ramaschal Mikon Sur Rabbanan Ladura. Let's begin. Mikon Sur Rabbanan Ladura. This was the question of Abaya. And in a case where an individual picked up an item on Shabbos and he was in Rishus HaYachid and he extended his hand out into the Rishus HaRabbim, he just did an Isser. The question is, did the Rabbanan make it also for him to bring his hand back or not? Mikon Sur Rabbanan Ladura. Did they give him a knas that he can't bring it back? And the question is, did they make his hand a carmelist or not? If they made his hand a carmelist, they gave him a knas, they made his hand as a carmelist, so now I can't bring it back anymore. Or they did not give him a knas, they didn't make his hand a carmelist, and therefore he's permitted to bring it back. Says Tosfos, near Lari, it seems to the Ri, the Garas Mia Sarur, that we're Garas, did they make it Osir, and his hand is a carmelist? The Loi Garas, and he's not Garas, Mi Kansur, did they give him a knas? In other words, the question was not, did they give him a knas that is in his hand as a carmelist, but rather did they make it Osir in his hand as a carmelist? Why does he distinguish between Isser and Knas? The Lakaman v'Samach, because later on nearby, Ki Mukma the Lafke Carmelist Damya. Later on, the Gemara wants to establish that both brises, both the one that says Mutter Lachzira and the one that says also Lachzira, they actually both hold the person's hand is not a Carmelist. So the one that says Mutter Lachzira, since it's not a Carmelist, he's permitted to bring it back. It's referring to a case where the individual extended his hand before Shabbos, and therefore we didn't impose any Knas on him. We didn't impose any consequence, since before Shabbos a person is allowed to take his hand out. So although we shouldn't have kept it out, but since initially didn't do an Isser, we're permitted to bring it back in. And the other brayso that says Asr, Amrina, we say the Asr Lachzira is Asr to bring it back, Mishum Knas, because of a Knas. And it's referring to a case where he extended his hand out on Shabbos. Since he wasn't permitted to do that, we gave him a Knas. So that seems to indicate that initially the question was, is it Asr? And we gave his hand the status of a carmelist. And then we conclude, no, we could learn it differently, that there's no Isser and there's no carmelist involved, rather it's a knas. So from the fact that later on the Gemara introduces the idea of a knas, seems to indicate that earlier on we weren't talking about a knas, so therefore he changes the girsa to Mia Sarua, and he chooses that as the correct girsa. Tosfos continues and says, V'sheman maybe, Ha'dav du a carmelist, nami have a knas. Maybe this that they made his hand the carmelist is a knas. In other words, it's not a choice between did they make it also for him to bring it back in, and they turned his hand into a carmelist, and therefore he can't bring it back in? And the other option is, did they just give him a knas without any carmelist status attached to it? That's not the only two ways of looking at it. There's another way of looking at it. That one choice is that they gave him a knas that his hand became a carmelist, and the other one is they gave a knas and his hand didn't become a carmelist. V'nafka mina, what's the difference whether it's a knas that his hand's a carmelist or just a regular knas? The difference is the asa b'shegig mi'ba'injim, that it's asa b'shegig or miba'edim. We're going to say or, that's how some of us should explain it. The difference is that if they gave him a knas that his hand is a carmelist, so once it's a carmelist, that's the status of the hand, he can never bring it back in. It's irrelevant whether he extended his hand out on Shabbos or before Shabbos, or whether he did it b'mezid or b'shegig. The bottom line is his hand is now outside. We gave him a knas that his hand is a carmelist. It's across the board in all cases. On the other hand, if we just gave him a knas and we didn't attach any status of carmelist to it, so then the knas will only be imposed when Chazal find it appropriate. So if the individual extended his hand out before Shabbos, they won't impose a knas. On Shabbos, they will. If he did it b'shegig, they won't impose a knas. If he did it b'mezid, they will. So to summarize, we introduced two possible ways of saying that the Rabbanan gave his hand the status of a carmelist. It could either result from an Isser, and that's how the Ri prefer to say, that it's an Isser and therefore his hand is a carmelist. And the other alternative choice is that we could say it's a knas that his hand is a carmelist. And the difference between saying that it's either Asr that is a carmelist or a knas that is a carmelist, and the other choice of saying that it's just a knas, is that if it became a carmelist, then it goes across all situations and there's no exceptions. Whereas if it's a knas, then it was imposed based on whether Chazal felt it would be appropriate or not.